survived by Amber, his bride of 13 years, Myrtis and Larry Jones, his parents, Brian and David, his brothers, and countless friends and acquaintances whose lives he touched, those of us here and many who could not make it. Paul was born at 12:35 a.m. at Sibley Memorial Hospital in Washington, D.C. He weighed 7 pounds 11 ounces and was 1 foot 9 inches tall. For those of you mathematically challenged, that's 21 inches. He was welcomed by his mother, Myrtis, 31, and his father, Larry, 34. He should have been born on the 8th of June. His mother was in labor for over 24 hours. When the doctors detected the first signs of fetal stress, they decided it was time to go for a C-section. They removed him. The doctor exclaimed, "Oh, that's why you didn't want to come out." The umbilical cord was attached to the uterus just above the birth canal, and Paul was trying to push it out ahead of him. Had he been successful, he likely would have had his birth and death the same day, and may have taken his mother with him. As it was, his parents got to enjoy his company for over 35 years. In the wee hours of the same morning, his father remembers standing in the hospital parking lot, crying more than Paul had when he was welcomed into the world. After a few days, Paul had had enough of the hospital and went home. His first home was a small white Rambler on Montgomery Avenue in Beltsville, Maryland, just down the street, for those of you that don't know. His rival for attention of his parents' love was Stoney the boxer. He also first met the lady whom he would affectionately refer to as Mommy Number 2, Mercedes, who is with us here today. Mercedes, would you please stay? She's right here. He got his great new room freshly decorated and proceeded to make himself right at home. 1981 was full of firsts. Most young boys don't get to know their great-grandmother, but Paul did. He soon went to Sligo Church to meet the pastor who married his parents, Leo Ranzelin, and was dedicated that day to be raised as a Christian. He celebrated his first Christmas with Santa Stoney. Met the real Santa and didn't even cry. He even got new shoelaces in his stockings, and it made him so very happy. 1982 saw Paul's first steps at 9 months in March. Got some teeth, began looking at his own books, feeding himself, and showing his personality. In 83, Paul started to travel. He went to Acapulco and then on to Brazil. He needed a passport and had the cutest passport photo ever. He met his grandfather, Vovo Milton, experienced his first kiss, played in his own pool, got his first haircut. He also discovered his favorite place to play, a small apple tree in his yard. The experience and safety he felt there would echo for the rest of his life. He went trick-or-treating. In 84, Paul wanted a little brother and was lucky he got 2. He drove his first car, went to the county fair, was caught kissing another girl, celebrated his 3rd birthday, and enjoyed Christmas with his 2 new brothers. In 1985, Paul began his education in preschool. In 1986, Paul turned 5 and attended kindergarten at the school just across the parking lot from this building. He spent as much time in his apple tree as he could. From the fall of '87, when he was 6 and in 1st grade, until he finished 4th grade in the spring of '91. Each year seemed to quickly follow the prior as he grew in stature and knowledge. In those years, Paul can be seen in videos pretending to be dinosaurs and other monsters. He discovered he liked scary things, which would also be a major part of his life as an adult. 5th grade saw a full awakening in Paul of a passion that would define his life as a man. His teacher that year was Mary Ballard, who was a major supporting influence on him. At the age of 10, Mary saw him rapidly expand his love of literature and encouraged him. He read constantly, even Shakespeare, which he consumed with the aid of a dictionary he kept by his side. He discovered Stephen King and enjoyed the fiction he wrote about things that go bump in the night. His vocabulary and general knowledge leapt ahead of his peers. Some began to go through puberty. By 6th grade, when he was 11, he recalled being teased by his friends because he had grown some long nose hairs, which he hurriedly cut. And he had started growing a mustache, so that he had to shave his upper lip. Imagine shaving mandatory at 11. Larry says he couldn't grow a mustache till he was 21. Paul found what would become one of his many passions. When he was younger, he liked to wander alone in the woods near his home. Now his trips would become more extensive, including sneaking out of his home late at night so he could wander for miles, listening to the night sounds, feeling the darkness of the shadows, the beauty of the night sky, and experiencing the magic of the unknown all around him. In the '93-'94 school year and 7th grade, he was developing the body of a middle teen, combined with the literary intellect of a college student and the emotions of a child of 12. It was a very confusing time for him. One of his biggest disappointments that year was that he tried to make the basketball team, but failed. He wasn't a natural athlete, and his gangly body was lumbering rather than graceful. Around this time, Paul discovered the magic of music. He began teaching himself to play the guitar by trying to mimic the riffs he heard on the metal music that he liked. He asked for and got some basic lessons, but in reality, taught himself. Finally, he was in 8th grade and going to graduate for high school. He made the basketball team by hard work and good coaching by Tom Gessel. Tom, wave. One of the highlights of the year was just after the basketball season ended. His coach took him aside and secretly gave him a trophy with MVP on it to reward him for all the hard work it took him to make the team and to play well. That trophy became one of his most cherished possessions. In this picture, he is close to 6 feet tall and still 4 months shy of 15. There are few pictures of Paul in the last half of '95. He started attending Spencerville Academy in the fall, but he didn't finish the semester. Having long hair and being different from the other kids made him feel isolated and lonely, so he enrolled in a homeschool program for the remainder of his freshman high school year. The dawn of 1996, Paul helped his dad with his new business called Majors Medical. From the first 6 months of that year, they were together constantly, just the two of them. Each day started with a long commute to the new office over in Lorton, Virginia. While his dad took phone calls, handled all the paperwork of the business, Paul was in charge of building each custom wheelchair that was to be delivered. And with the remainder of each day, he studied, read, and shot basketballs into a portable goal purchased just for that purpose. When late afternoon and evening came around, they would load the van and go deliver their sales to the homes of the customers who could be anywhere in the DC area. They typically didn't get home until past dinner time. Those were very long days, but a time when a father and a son could form a strong bond and friendship that persisted and grew over time. His sophomore year was 96-97. That fall, Paul was enrolled in Shenandoah Valley Academy in Newmarket, Virginia. For most of the 3 years he spent there, he had a dorm room to himself, which suited him just fine. He knew by then that he wanted to be a musician and a writer and pursued both goals simultaneously. Intellectually, he grew exponentially. His curiosity about history, philosophers, and writers from ancient times to the present became insatiable. By his junior year, he had taught himself about the mythologies and the pantheons of the ancient Middle Eastern religions. He also taught himself ancient Greek and Hebrew in order to better understand the Bible in its original contexts. His knowledge became well known to his teachers, prompting a memorable exchange in a class one day when his teacher was explaining the deeper meaning of an Old Testament text. His teacher stated what the text was really saying. Then, in an aside, he looked at Paul and said to the class, "If it's okay with Paul." It was said as a compliment, not as an insult, and Paul appreciated it very much. During his junior and senior years, Paul came home almost every weekend just to get away and do what he wanted. The trips down and back amounted to 2 hours per leg for his dad, but the 4 hours of that were spent together each week, when usually alone, which continued to strengthen their bond. Paul was given the leading role in the senior play, A Tale of Two Cities. He also composed the class song, played his guitar with the group of his musician friends, and sang the solos. It was a good way to end high school, but he was anxious to move on with his life. Paul didn't see the point of a college education, since he had determined by then that he wanted to be a professional writer and was doing very well educating himself. Both of his parents, individually and together, finally convinced him that he could become a college professor of creative writing and have plenty of time to write while being paid to do what he loved to anyway. So he enrolled at the University of Maryland for the school year 99 and 2000 and lived at home. He was 18. During his time at Maryland, he took a couple of elective courses in music theory and music composition. He loved them, and they helped make him a better composer. However, before his college career began, Paul took a month-long tour of the United States. His parents helped him outfit one of his dad's old delivery vans for the long trip, and Paul took off. He drove south and west, starting to start going to the places his heart fancied. He particularly liked the national parks in Utah. He went to California and drove on up to the state of Washington, and then meandered back across the northern states. To earn spending money during the school year, he got a job as a waiter at 94th Aero Squadron, a restaurant just east of the campus, adjacent to the old College Park Airport. He also had begun writing for an online heavy metal magazine, music magazine. His reviews must have been influential because weekly he got 2 to 3 boxes in the mail containing 10 or more CDs from recording companies who wanted him to review them. He attended numerous concerts, wrote reviews about them and the musicians too. Despite his busy schedule, he made the dean's list his first semester and seemed happy and at ease. He had found an environment and routine that suited him. Before starting his sophomore year, he announced that he was going to take the fall semester off to work full-time as a waiter so he could purchase an expensive keyboard to use for mixing and composition, plus a modern, top-notch electric guitar to play. His old guitar lacked the capability to put into sound what his mind conceived, so that's what he did. Around the end of October, in the year 2000, he was conducting a telephone interview with a singer and guitarist, Danny Kavanagh, from a band called Anathema, based in Liverpool. After the interview was finished, Danny asked Paul what he did for a living. Paul explained that he was a student at the University of Maryland and had taken the semester off to earn money to buy a new guitar. Danny said he was also in the market for a new guitar. Paul had seen the band in concert and knew exactly what he had. "What are you asking for your old guitar?" Given the price in reply, Paul said, "Sold." Paul took some time off, bought a round-trip ticket from Air Canada, the best price he could find, and took off for London. From Heathrow, he took the underground into London, and then caught the train to Liverpool. Danny took him sightseeing in the nearby area and Wales, and they hung out together for a week. He autographed the back of the guitar, and Paul set off on the reverse leg of his journey. He arrived at Heathrow 12 hours before the flight, so he made himself comfortable with a book and waited. This is now Amber's version of those 12 hours. Amber, chubby, and wearing Doc Martens, is sitting in Heathrow Airport departure lounge, reading a book and waiting for her flight to Denver, Colorado to see some friends for a 3-month holiday. Paul is wandering around the same departure lounge. Amber sees a tall, long-haired, handsome-looking guy in a long coat walk past and casually pretends to not stare at him over the top of her book. He sits down directly in front of her so that she couldn't stare without getting caught. With the cheesiest pickup line of all time, Paul asks, "Do you have the time?" while having a pocket watch in his jeans the whole time. Paul managed to charm his way into conversation that ended with the two of them realizing that they were on the same flight out of London. Comparing passports and literature interests was easy and fun, and they knew something was meant to be when they realized that even their birthdays were only one day apart. Continuing his gentlemanly performance, Paul asked Amber to sit in the empty seat next to him on the plane. Together they flew to their connecting flights in Canada, and he gave her his phone number. Several weeks later, Amber thought, "What the?" and called him from Colorado. They spent hours on the phone, like those classic 1980 teenage movie characters. Paul was funny, interesting, smart, and totally romantic. In a move that will never ever be topped, Paul drove out to Colorado from Maryland in a straight shot with no stops. And for 2 weeks they spent their first date, that's a good one, traveling the national parks of the Midwest. It was by far the best first date and the best vacation in their history. He dropped her off in Denver and headed home. At some point on his way home, he turned around and headed back to Denver. He picked Amber up, and together they headed for Maryland. Amber, slightly terrified of what his family might think, goes along anyway because she's young and doesn't make good decisions yet. It really was a good decision because his family was not fazed that Paul had left for 2 weeks and came home with a female. Despite her misgivings, they all fell in love. By this time, she was totally in love with Paul and knew she would do anything to stay with him. Paul felt the same. Amber's memory recalls the email exchanges after I returned to the UK were most definitely vomitous, and it's probably good that no one can see them again. Amber couldn't move to the US, and Paul couldn't move to the UK. So they both met in an odd Middle-earth location. The only way they could be together was to be in the same place at the same time. Amber, you see, was born in New Zealand, so she could go to school there with government loans. As for Paul, the international student tuition was the same for in-state tuition at the University of Maryland, after factoring in the exchange rates. So the solution was New Zealand and the University of Canterbury in Christchurch. As Amber remembers, after months and months of nauseating love notes and declarations of undying love, Amber and Paul met in Christchurch, New Zealand, to start college together. They finally found a place near the campus where they could rent half of a small house. It even had a lemon tree outside the front door. Unfortunately, it didn't make the cut of this photo. Another benefit of being in New Zealand was that Amber's maternal grandparents and other relatives lived only about an hour away. Besides, the South Island of New Zealand is not a bad place to go to school together. Larry and Myrtis arrived in New Zealand to visit Paul and Amber in early December 2002, to visit for a couple weeks, summertime there. This particular picture was taken near the only albatross nesting area, not on a small island far out to sea. The foul weather gear is understandable. Despite being summer, the beaches have penguins and sea lions lounging on them. It can get quite brisk at times. Those were indeed very happy times together. In 2003, Amber and Paul visited just prior to Christmas and then went on to the UK to spend the holiday with Amber's family. Before their wedding, Paul composed this poem for Amber. Oh, this is a hard word to pronounce. Prothalamium. There you go. I've practiced and still can't say it. My tongue doesn't want, it's too old to go around these new words. Is a song or poem anticipating a wedding. A kind of fall. And from my shoulder, my atrophied wing, to better choose for you a quill. For oft it is blood that bids dry ink well sing, my vessel for a better throat to trill. I will cleave and happily then to you, and swear that I will be there in this dark world to which we wake, though it be not true. Not so for you, who makes my heart a lark. I believe it has and will be other things, 100,000 hearts for as many loves. But e'en as those were broken, you've healed these wings and hoisted up this heart of mine above itself. And nothing else would be so well or right than becoming one with one that fills this life with light. They returned to the U.S. to get married in the ultra-romantic, atmospheric Montgomery County Courthouse in Rockville. Amber says, I can still see Paul's face and hear his voice as he repeated his vows. His voice was soft, warm, full of love, and he totally made me cry. Towards the end of 2004, they loaded up their white van, affectionately named the Crone, and drove all over the South Island of New Zealand for one last hurrah before returning to the U.S. for the next chapter of their lives. Amber remembers New Zealand as the time we learned to be in a long-term. New Zealand was the time we learned how to be a long-term couple, something neither of us had done before. We think we made a pretty good start. By January 2005, Paul and Amber were back in the U.S. and ready for the rest of their lives. They moved into Paul's old basement room in the Jones house. February, Amber's parents, Tony and Zoe, came to visit, and we all celebrated anniversaries together. Tony and Zoe celebrated their 25th anniversary on February 9th, and Amber and Paul had their first on February 5th, 2005. Amber and Paul were happy together and felt like they had been together forever. Paul soon discovered that an English degree does not qualify anyone for anything work-related, so he found work at Johns Hopkins scheduling radiology patients. In May 2005, Amber had her worsening scoliosis repaired by fusing 12 vertebrae and spent most of the rest of the year recovering and in rehab. Amber says of this time, Paul goes camping, sleeping on a mattress next to my hospital bed. We go to sleep like this, holding hands for months on end. Paul's love and support during my recovery is true love. During this time, Paul is working, studying at Baltimore City Community College to get extra credits so that he can apply for radiology technology school. He was an amazing, supportive, caring husband and friend to me, and I will be forever grateful that he was my wife and my protector during that year. Paul takes Amber on a fabulous holiday to the Smokies. They rented a cabin for 2 weeks and spent the whole time hiking. Amber falls in love with Tennessee and still can't wait to go back. The people and the environment are amazing for them both, and they continue to share their love for the outdoors. December 2007, their son, Barzai, the wise, is born. Paul found a blue Abyssinian boy for Amber directly to her specifications as a Christmas and wedding anniversary present. In early 2008, they drove to Maine in a snowstorm to collect him. Paul was deathly allergic to cats and almost didn't make the ride back. He bravely overcame his severe allergies to make sure that his Amzer. Okay, I should have put a Z in there. His Amzer was the blue sun she dreamed of. They both loved Barzai with all their heart and had a blast getting to know him. they realize that Barzai needs a friend, and they add his little sister, Makeda of Sheba, to the family. Now they are complete and have so much fun taking family photos. There was no shame. In '08, Paul also became Handyman of the Year and tore out all the carpet in the upstairs bedrooms, replacing it with floorboards. Amber was impressed. Paul and Amber shared almost 15 years together, the longest either of them had ever shared with anyone. They were both fortunate to be able to say that they knew each other better than anyone. If any couple has experienced love, friendship, pain, sadness, hilarity, creativity, nature, and life itself, it is they. Their time together was short, but it was a lifetime. They were both shaped by each other and will forever have each other in their hearts. Their greatest times were spent together, outside and with books. This is the last picture Larry has with his son. Paul requested that his ashes be spilled from this West Virginia cliff so that he can fly away. Thank you.
Now, if you look in the program, is to have people speak and give tributes to Paul. I have 3 that are recorded. Amber's parents, Zoe and Tony, are in the UK and couldn't be here. So they have recorded something. And I've got a lady that became acquainted with Paul in his literary career, and she recorded something about some of the things they did together. And then we'll open the floor up for others to speak, and I will start, and then we'll have someone speaking from Beardus. Then we'll invite as many of you as want to come up and say things about what you remember and think of Paul. Come up and say a few words.
I'm Zoe, I'm Amber's mum. My recollections of Paul are him and I frantically pumping out water from the basement of their house. It took us all day. And then driving to West Virginia, listening to audio books, there and back. I think we did it twice. And in West Virginia, him saving me from over-interested cows who decided they'd like to have a bite of me. Another time, we were painting the ceiling of the house, and he went out to get more paint, came back, we're painting frantically, and we realised we've got gloss instead of matte, so we're trying to blend it all in together. I realised, thinking about Paul, that I'd spent quite a lot of time with him, just him and I. And he indulged my chattering nature, and I loved him and I respected him for that.
Hi, I'm Tony, I'm Amber's dad, and well, it's always hard to say anything at these times. But you know, I remember having some really good times with Paul, like when we went to Venice, the 4 of us, Zoe and me and Paul and Amber, on a cold and murky January, and we had a good time together in the 4 days that we were there. You remember the Count, the guy who was our he was like a porter or something at the hotel. We laughed about the Count. And Paul actually helped me to understand something of the American people, because I've got to say, Americans, you're not always the easiest of people to understand from a European or an Antipodean perspective, but Paul took pains to try and help me understand something of the American spirit by taking us around to historic sites like the Triangle of Jamestown, Williamsburg, and whatever the other one is, and then up to Boston and to the Plymouth Plantation, and us having robust conversations about what it means to be American. I appreciated that from him. And like Zoe, I did some road trips with him to West Virginia, and he would always have an interesting audio book on the go. He had an unusual taste in some books, but that was Paul, wasn't it? He wasn't your usual character, and I think we were good friends. So I wish you all well. We all do on this day. This comes with love and respect from me and from Zoe, and with every blessing from us.
I'm here to pay tribute.
I wanted to say a word about Nina before she started, because she doesn't explain who she is. One of my oldest friends is a fellow named Fima Shapiro. Fima was born in the former Soviet Union, and Nina was born in the country of Georgia, and they are married, and Fima is her husband. But Nina was the head of the Cyrillic Library at Princeton University for many, many years. And so she worked with the students there who were studying Russian literature and things of that sort. And she had an opportunity to see all kinds of folks, and she was very, very familiar with Russian literature. Paul was working on a story of a boy born in Georgia who then traveled around the country of Russia before it became the Soviet Union, about 120 years ago. And so he wanted to talk to Nina to get some ideas and make sure he was going in the right direction. Thus this.
To Paul and his tremendous talent and deep intellectual capabilities. The grief of the Jones family is immeasurable and is unexpressible. We are incapable of comprehending it, measuring it, and using mere words to speak of it. But a man of Paul's sensitivity and intellect might have been able to do this. In fact, I am certain of it. A few years ago, Larry called me and asked me if I would be willing to speak to Paul about Russian literature and history because of my background and education. Of course I agreed, and I was so happy that I did. Paul called me and we started talking. He asked me about some lesser-known works of Russian literature, far from the War and Peace and Crime and Punishment works. Paul had read the autobiography of Avvakum, a 17th century masterpiece that most students of Russian literature never read. Avvakum, a priest, had suffered torture, imprisonment, and exile for his faith. He continued to drive out demons and marvel in God's wonders and creations of nature. Paul also studied Mikhail Lermontov's early 19th century romantic poem Mtsiri, about a 17-year-old monk who grapples with a wild cat to retain his faith. Paul also knew the ancient Georgian folk legend that served as the basis for this poem. Paul was later studying Andrei Bieley's Kotik Litaev, an autobiographical novel by the great symbolist poet of the early 20th century. Paul had tremendous breadth and depth of knowledge of Russian literature, greater than many graduate students I had met who specialized in Russian literature. I marveled at this, and it brought me great pleasure. We must have talked that night for over 2 hours. When I told him that the Russian word for wormwood, a word found in the book of Revelation, was Chernobyl, he became very excited, and this was the basis for our next conversation. He followed these various threads and pulled them together in his own writings and in his thoughts. I look forward to his emails and the next set of questions. I regret that I never met Paul personally, but the greatness of his intellect and talent will always be with me. May his memory be eternal.
I mourned yesterday, and I'm going to mourn tomorrow. I try to celebrate Paul's life, and I would encourage you to do the same. I thought I would tell a couple of stories, and then I'll have something presented for my wife, and then I'd like to open the floor up for anyone who would like to speak. Paul was quite a character. When sometimes we would travel together, he would listen to, as Tony said, his books on tape. And he pulled the plug on it one day to let me listen to it. It was at double speed. If you've ever listened to a videotape, an auditory tape at double speed, it's almost incomprehensible, but that's how he listened to books. He absorbed it that quickly. It was kind of an amazing talent. When he couldn't even speak, maybe 18 months or younger. I was playing with him in the basement one day, and Meredith had bought him these little wooden blocks, the old-fashioned kind with the letters and numbers on them in various colors. And he looked at this one and he went, "Ugh!" And I called the letter, say it was A. And he went, "Ugh!" B. He couldn't even ask the W questions, why? That kind of stuff that we get bombarded with as parents. But anyway, he kept that up, and he played that game for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then he got bored and went on to something else. For the next few days, he would do the exact same thing, and before the week was out, he would go A, B. He'd already begun to understand that those symbols had a meaning, they had a name. I don't know if he, put them together when he was reading his little books and realized that there was those same symbols again. But I don't believe he was reading by the time he came to be in the first grade. And his kindergarten teacher is here as well. I don't know that he was reading by that time, but he had already begun at a very young age to be interested in literature, so it was kind of unusual. The other thing I will tell you about the time, at the same time, I used to work with a guy named H.B. Evans. H.B. was born and raised in North Carolina. He was a PhD chemist, and we used to have to ride together to visit customers in the North and South Carolina area. And this poor fella had to listen to me talk about Paul this, Paul that, Paul the other, constantly. And then one day, when I guess I took a moment to swallow or take a breath, he looked at me and he says, and I can't do Forrest Gump, but that's what he sounded like. He says, every crow thinks his crow is the blackest. I got the point, and I stopped talking quite so much. But I hope, I won't be the only one that will crow about Paul and maybe tell a funny anecdote or all. Pam, are you able to do this? Pam is being a real soldier and substituting for my way. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pam Johnson Gator. I'm a friend of the families, and I've known the boys for a long time. Very special. At school at Beltsville. This is a letter that Paul wrote to his parents at graduation from SVA. I'm reading his words. Dear Murtis Jones, Larry Jones, Brian, and David, it is hard to tell you all how much I love you and appreciate you, and at the same time avoid embarrassing myself in front of all my friends, but I'll give it the old college try. Mom, thank you for always making sure that I didn't go back to school empty-handed. You always made certain I had something extra to eat in my room in case the cafe exploded or something. Thank you for calling me to see how I was doing, and thank you for always making me feel glad to be home when I would come back. You were always there with a smile on your face and an incredible meal on the stove. Dad, try not to get too choked up, but you're not so bad yourself. You've always treated me like an adult, and you've given me respect, and as a result, self-respect. When you see that I'm about to screw up, you are always there to give me good advice, but you still let me screw up if I push it, allowing me to learn from my mistakes and to come out a better man. It takes a lot to do that, and to do that well, and you do. I couldn't have had a better mentor, nor a better father. Thank you. I know myself, most kids aren't so lucky, and that very few have parents like you both. You trust them to be independent, love them when they mess up, and support them in all that they dream of and everything they aspire to. Life just couldn't be as good without you. I'm so glad you're both here today, and I love you so much. Note, I love my brothers too. I just ran out of room. Love always, Paul Jones. And Murtis wanted to say this. This is her handwriting. Paul was so sure of himself. I will never forget that he would always place his arms around me, even in the auditorium in front of his friends and adults. I thank God for having had the privilege of being his mother. And I know that in the last few minutes of his life, the Lord comforted him. I will not leave you comfortless. I will come to you. John 14:18. In my Father's house are many mansions, and I will go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you may be also. John 14:2-3.
I'm Mark Begans, and I was a boss and co-worker of Paul's, and I've known and loved Larry for 15 or 16 years, and Paul for probably 10 of those years. And he was an MRI technologist in the role that I knew him. And this experience today kind of reminds me of the story of the parable of the blind men and the elephant. And you know, the elephant is very much like a spear if you touch its tusk, but Paul was obviously a very deep and complicated and complex man, and he had a lot to offer and a lot of gifts. The gifts that I knew were the gifts as a medical professional, and he was exemplary at it. He was had a role where you had to have both love and kindness and technical expertise. He had both of those, and he had both of them really well. And if any of you guys have experienced having an MRI examination when you've been sick or ill, or know people that have, it can be an intimidating experience. And the difference between the person who's driving that machine, who's doing a great job, and one who's just doing a job is pretty substantial. The person who does a great job helps the patient through the process with love and kindness and empathy, and Paul really had that. And then the other side of it, it's almost like a mission control process where you're driving a complicated piece of equipment with a computer system. And so there's technical expertise that Paul was really a master of. He, as stated in the writing, he used his job as an MRI technologist really as an opening for the rest of his life. He worked long shifts, a lot of them independently, because he was capable of it. He was so talented, and so that he could pursue his other loves and adventures. And I know I'm looking forward to reading some of his writings, and that's going to be something that we're going to do soon. Anyway, we miss Paul and wanted to give that little perspective of something that the radiology side of Paul, which is something that I imagine some here don't know how good he was at. He truly had a gift, and he helped people a lot.
I'm Eric Clemmer. I went to school with Paul from kindergarten, right here. And then eventually he came over to Spencerville, and we went to school there for a little bit until he moved up to SVA. And we, at some point, we lost contact for a little bit, but we always got it back. So we've known each other our whole lives, pretty much. Man, there's so many stories of like laughter that I can amuse you all with. But a couple in particular was, I remember one night he came over to my house. It was right before you came to pick him up. And, you know, we were young men, feeling all anxious. So we put on these big boxing gloves, and we were whooping the tar out of each other pretty much. And at the end of it all, I don't know who won. He'll say I won, and I'll say he won. But at the end of it all, there was a roof, right? And in the garage, typical 8-foot ceiling roof. I was like, hey man, bet you I can kick that flat-footed, right? He was like, no way, you can't do that. There's no way you can do that. And I remember Paul had taken karate. He had size, like the Ninja Turtles. We'd always play with the size. So I was like, oh man, I know you know karate. I can do karate too. Just stand back, watch out. I line up, do my kick, whoop, straight on the back, out on the ground. And Paul's just like laughing, and I'm just like laughing. And it was just like these moments that you can always remember, like the laughter and the fun times we shared together. And I mean, that's something I will never stop thinking about in that moment. Man, I just had another one too sitting there that I wanted to mention, and of course now I'm up front and have everyone lost my mind on the situation. But yeah, that dude, man, there's just so much fun. Hold on now, it's coming to me. Something with music. Well, now me and him played guitar together for the longest time. I believe I have the first recording of Paul on a guitar that I did at his bedroom in the house. And I still have it to this day. And we're playing a song that he wrote. And I got to the house that afternoon. He's like, "No, Eric, this is the part you're going to play." I was like, all right, man, I got you. Show me what to do. So I would learn it. He gave me the easy stuff because he was a little bit more talented at it than me. And then he would play the lead on it. And we would play it and listen to it like, oh, that's not good. But I can go back now to this day and listen to those recordings. And we're both complaining about how our fingers are hurting. Because at that point, you don't have the calluses yet to play for a while. And it's hilarious. He's like, oh man, my finger's really killing me. That G string is just really hard to play. And I mean, I've got tapes on tapes on tapes of me and him just jamming out. Sorry, you guys had to listen to that. I was on the drums, so I probably was the worst part, but Paul certainly was loud on his electric guitar. And wow. Did the neighbors hear that, you think? Never? Well, they didn't say anything. That's good.
Ashton, you're all here.
I'm sorry, man. Neighbors here, I apologize. But yeah, look, we always care a lot of love for Paul, and we always will. So that's the bottom line here for today. It's like he's always going to be right there with us, and we're going to be right there with him. Just keep that in mind. Good dude.
He drove up from North Carolina to be with us today. Fantastic bike.
He looks so much like Paul, it's crazy. I actually just saw a picture recently and I was like, oh my gosh, is that Paul? It's Brian, right? Yeah, yes. My name's Mike Major. Paul is one of my very close friends and co-workers. Just looking at this picture, it's funny because Paul obviously was always so mature looking, extremely handsome, with like a very Brazilian facial hair. And me and one of the other guys at work were talking, and we're trying to decide where this picture was from. The other guy said, well, maybe it's a modeling picture. And then we decided this is probably his ultrasound. I worked with Paul for a while, and we worked in a very close environment, and we became kind of pressure cooker friends, just always there all day. And I like to believe that I'm a deep guy, but Paul is actually a deep guy, and we would just have the best conversations. Of course we'd be doing work, but sometimes it was working around our conversations because they were just so, just crazy stuff like no one else would talk about, like, where did God come from, which religion's right, on and on about politics, and, of course, Russian prisons and all kind of wacky stuff. If someone else came in the room, we just have to stop because it's embarrassing. It's funny that he worked in the medical field because he was a super germaphobe. One of the best tricks that I ever saw played on Paul is a friend of ours, Kelly, who works there. He's this like big, rotund, kind of Joe Pesci guy. Paul went out of the room and there was a gown. The patient left the gown on the back of the dressing room door, and Kelly took a candy bar and smeared it all over the gown. And then when Paul came in, he goes, "What the hell is this?" He threw it at Paul, and Paul's ginormous peacock hands went out there. It's like to throw a ball of fire at him. But we would always do that. I would always take bites of Paul's food so I could finish it because I knew he wouldn't eat it after that. But, you know, Paul was just this amazing human being, and he really changed my perspective on a lot of things and kind of, I guess, enlightened me on a lot of things that I hadn't thought, you know, that I could think deeper on, for example, religion and those kind of things. And, you know, life is messy and complicated, and, you know, we're here, and this, you know, this is always messy and complicated. And Paul wasn't afraid of that ever. And I think that's one of the things that I respected about him the most, is that he wasn't afraid to, you know, dig his hands in the dirt and think about the questions that people don't want to ask or want to hide from. And I'm going to miss those conversations because there's not a whole lot of people who can hang that way intellectually, or, you know, even some depth of wisdom. But I'll definitely carry everything that he taught me and the lessons I learned from him. Because even though I always said he should have been a teacher, he should have been, you know, an actual writer where that's all he did, but he always said that he never wanted to do that because it would bastardize it, and he didn't want his you know, his loves to be work per se, because then it will ruin it, if that makes any sense. But you know, we're gonna miss him a lot. Paul was a very spiritual guy, and like I said, we have many conversations about that, and he definitely believed in God. He was a very open-minded person, and I appreciate about him so much. But he believed that when you die, you definitely don't just go into the ground. And I believe that he's here with us now, and we'll carry him with us the rest of our lives as whatever is on the other side, whether it's energy or, you know, a house in heaven. But we're gonna miss him, and I'll always remember that. Thank you.
I was also fortunate to get to know Paul better as a person when our families socialized, and he was ruthless when it came to playing cards, just want you to know that. He always walked to the beat of his own drummer. He wasn't, most kids try to fit in, he didn't. Whatever was speaking to him, who he was, that's who Paul was. And he was a pretty amazing person that he was. In grade school, he could carry on an intelligent and interesting conversation with an adult. He was a gifted writer, even in middle school. He wrote the papers that the teachers didn't mind reading, you know, like when you have a whole stack and you're like, really, I gotta keep going. His were the ones you're like, oh yes, I get to read this. Paul kept in touch off and on throughout the years. When he graduated 8th grade, he'd shoot me an email. He'd stop by the school to visit. The last time was about a year ago. He came by. We talked about family, talked about Beltsville memories, and talked about his writing. He told me he had been published, and I said, look, I want to read some, you know, can you send me something? And he's like, sure, I'll send you something. But he's like, now you're not going to like it. It's not your kind of story. But he sent it anyway. And he was right. It was not my kind of story. But the writing craft was truly amazing. He was a very, very gifted writer. And for Larry, Murtis, Amber, Brian, and David, just know my family wants you to know that our hearts are hurting with you, and that we're going to hold our memories of Paul and all of you close.
My name is Brenda Plummer, and I was Paul's maybe a second teacher that he had. I don't know, he went to preschool. This is not something that, you know, for a teacher to have to come and talk about their memories of a student when they should be there. And I do have quite a few memories. The schoolroom was in this church. They didn't move us to the school for several years. I had to have one of the classrooms, and the education went in the church. Paul definitely did walk. I could tell at that young age, I guess he was 5, that he did walk to his own tune or his own drum. And I got some books where he could, you know, look at pictures of snakes, and I think I maybe even talked about how he'll be a herpetologist or something. And so you know, that was a long time ago. That's like 30 years ago. And we do miss him a lot today, and my heart is really heavy for your family, and I pray for all of you as you go through this time.
My name is Jessica, and Paul and I were in kindergarten together up through 6th grade when I moved down to Newmarket. So I got to enjoy his friendship again when he came down to go to the academy. And I'm also the niece who lost the lizard in the van. And the interesting thing is we have so many memories. I remember getting hurt at his house in a play date when we were little, itty bitty. And I was a girl, so I cried, and he was a boy, so he laughed. And, you know, all in all, it was okay. But, you know, and I didn't expect him to not laugh, so that was okay too. But just even a couple months ago, I'm homeschooling one of my sons who marches to his own drummer, and thought the coolest project would be to get him a lizard, to learn how to care for it, and to kind of adapt its environment as he learns about it. And immediately I said, do not grab it by the tail, because my buddy Paul would have told you that it's cool to see the tail fall off, but it takes a long time for it to grow back. So, and Mom and Dad won't be happy. Because I remember when we were little and playing with the lizards, that's what he always said. Don't pull it by its tail because it'll fall off and Mom and Dad will think I did it. So, just really cool. We hadn't seen each other since high school. And I wish we could have, because even when he was reading or whatever he was doing, he liked his solidarity, and he would be sitting on the bench out on front campus of school, and no matter what he was doing, if you stopped by and said, hey, he would stop what he was doing and make time for you. And so he'll be very missed. My kids have already heard all about Paul and how cool he was, and they'll continue to hear about him and how it's okay and great to be yourself.
Hi, I'm Erin, and Jones and Paul are like family to us, and I just have one quick short story that's so special. One night we were having a dinner party at the house, and Jones, Amber, and Paul were there, and my son, who's 21, and all his friends were spending the night. And they came back to the house. They were spending the night because they were going to a festival in Baltimore. As we were sitting around the table and they all came home, we played Cards Against Humanity, which opened up several discussions. One of which, Paul ended up talking to the boys. And the quote that I'll never forget is one of the men at the young table said, "Man, don't destroy me with your words." That will ever be a special night. Later, on the way over here today, Brad texted me and said how much he loved Paul in just those few moments, that he idolized him at that moment. He became a man he wanted to inspire to be like. Later, he told me all the boys wanted to push themselves educationally because the girl said being smart is sexy. So.
I'm Laura Melton. I actually worked with Paul also. I just have really good memories of Paul. Definitely a different guy when I first met him. When he first came to CMI, he actually left and came back. And just remember Paul, just good memories about Amber, about how they met, about how you always didn't have to buy an expensive bottle of wine, but the cheap stuff's really good too. Would always tell us about his Tuesday pizza night. He'd get the 2-for-1 pizza, and the pizza guy knew him, and that he didn't even have to order. He would just walk in and be like, "I'm here for my pizza." And the guy would make it up for him. One of my funny stories with Paul was we knew at a party. Like, we'd have good parties in Chesapeake, and just having a good time. And I was like, "Paul, don't forget, you gotta work tomorrow." And he's like, "Oh, it's totally cool, just drinking wine." And I'm like, "Okay, that's good." And he called me the next day, and he was like, "Laura, I'm feeling pretty rough." And I was like, "You okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, I think it might have been the shrimp." So just, not the 2 shots that you took with Chris, but the shrimp. So, he was a great guy, and he'll definitely be missed.
And I saw Tessie somewhere. Where are you? There's Tessie in the back. The neighbors will remember Tessie playing with all the kids when they were in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, having a ball in the neighborhood. And I'm glad to have you here. I'm sorry you came a little late because you're really part of our family, Tessie. For those who knew him after that time, I'd like all the neighbors that are here that were on Cabot Creek Court and Cabot Creek, please stand. All the neighbors, just stand so people can see who you are. These are the folks that had a lot of influence on Paul when he was prior to school and as a young boy. They all bought homes about 30 years ago in the same neighborhood that they grew up together. Next, the teachers. We've met a couple of the very other teachers here, assistant teachers, and Wendy Pagan is here to stand. Wendy's right there. Wendy was the principal of the school. And, okay, so the others, I guess, are not here. We've met some of his schoolmates. Are there any others that have not spoken? Schoolmates? All right. The people who are here who work with Paul in some way, if you would stand up so everyone can see who you are. Okay, there, the radiology. And then, so what I would like to do is we're going to play a final tribute that was put together by a man named Andrew Hand. Andrew was a schoolmate at Paul's at Shenandoah Valley Academy, and they've remained friends all these years. Andrew's now a professional musician, and so Paul had written a song, and he sang the lyrics for this, what you're going to hear next. He played all the musical instruments, and Andrew mixed it. And then when he heard of Paul's passing, he added pictures. That's what you're going to see today. So when that's finished, then it's time for us to start talking to one another, and hopefully we can all swap stories that are fun and not sad.
These things started with a memory, which I first mistook for a dream, in which I watched a boy
landlocked, though I forgot, salt wound throughout my thoughts. 8 bells broke my watch, broke me fast. The ship is lost and I couldn't unfurl her gallant, but I tried. And this morning, all the fog found way inside. Mountains rose like waves to assume the sky, and this evening seas of long dead grasses wave good night. Landlord, yet nevermore solved wound, and still I swoon, though I could not furl her gallant if I tried. And this morning all the windows' panes went blind. Ghosts of all the cargo kept in chests still whisper in the hold, although my ocean rests. Riptides rise inside, undertowing soul. You can say I tried, but I couldn't unfurl her gallant, though I tried. And this morning all the fog found way inside. The mountains wed the sky until there was no day. The marriage draped in gray flung the firmament away. Never grasped bouquet, unfound and foundering, we say. Okay, I do.